Hello everyone. My name is Miguel. I want to share a story with you today. The story changed how I think about learning English. It's not about grammar rules. It's not about vocabulary tests. It's about how simple phrases helped me feel at home in America. 3 years ago, I moved to the United States from Mexico. I was 22 years old. I had just finished university. I wanted to work and improve my English. Before leaving Mexico, I studied English for many years. I knew grammar very well. I could explain present perfect and past simple. I could write formal essays. But when I arrived in America, I had a big problem. I couldn't have normal conversations. The problem was simple. I learned textbook English, not real English. When people spoke to me, I didn't understand them. They used expressions I never heard before. They spoke fast. They used short phrases that skipped grammar rules. I felt frustrated. Sometimes people would say something to me. I would just stare at them. I tried to translate every word in my head. By the time I understood, they were already gone. I remember my first week in New York City very clearly. I stayed with my cousin Roberto in Brooklyn. Roberto lived in America for 5 years. He spoke English fluently. He tried to help me, but he was busy. Most of the time, I was on my own. I needed to find work quickly. I didn't have much money. Roberto helped me get an interview at a restaurant. It was a busy Italian restaurant in Manhattan. They needed help in the kitchen. On the day of my interview, I wore my best clothes. I practiced answering questions in English. I prepared sentences like, "I am a hard worker." I felt ready. When I arrived, the manager Tony greeted me. He shook my hand. Then he said something I will never forget. He said, "Hey, how's it going?" I froze. How's it going? What did that mean? Was he asking where I was going? I stood there silently. I tried to figure it out. Tony looked at me with confusion. After a long pause, I said, "Yes, thank you." It made no sense. I knew it. Tony looked even more confused. But he smiled politely. He invited me inside. The interview continued. I could tell Tony was unsure about me. He asked simple questions about my experience. I answered correctly. But our conversation felt stiff. He used casual phrases like, "Let me see," and "That sounds good." Each time, I hesitated. I didn't know if I should respond in a specific way. By the end, I felt exhausted. Tony said he would call me, but I could tell he wasn't impressed. I left, feeling embarrassed. That evening, I talked to Roberto. I told him what happened. I said I didn't understand Tony's simple phrases. Roberto laughed, but not in a mean way. He said, "Miguel, you need to stop thinking like a textbook. People here don't talk like your English teacher. They use chunks." I asked him what chunks meant. He explained that chunks are groups of words. People always use them together. They are like shortcuts in conversation. Instead of building sentences word by word, people use ready-made phrases. Things like, "How's it going?" and "Long time no see." If you don't know these chunks, you'll always feel lost. Roberto spent that evening teaching me. He taught me common chunks he used every day. He made me repeat them over and over. He taught me that "How's it going?" needs a simple answer, like, "Not bad, you," or "Pretty good, thanks." He taught me that long time no see is for people you haven't seen in a while. He taught me that "I don't feel like it" means you don't want to do something. He taught me that "that sounds good" means you agree. At first, these phrases felt strange. They didn't follow grammar rules. Some seemed incomplete. Some seemed too informal. But Roberto insisted this is how real people talk. He said, "If you want to sound natural, speak in chunks, not in textbook sentences." I decided to trust him. I started practicing every day. I said them out loud while walking. I repeated them on the subway. I made them part of my routine. A few days later, Tony called me. He said they would give me a chance. I could start working on Monday. I was nervous but excited. This was my opportunity. I could practice my chunks in real situations. My first day at the restaurant was overwhelming. The kitchen was hot and noisy. Everyone shouted orders. They moved quickly. They spoke fast English. But I tried to stay calm. I used the chunks Roberto taught me. When a cook named Danny asked me, "Hey, how's it going?" I didn't freeze. I smiled and said, "Not bad, you?" Danny grinned. He said, "Awesome, man. Welcome to the team." It was a small moment, but it felt huge. I had used a chunk in real conversation, and it worked. I felt confident. Throughout that first day, I listened carefully. I noticed people used chunks constantly. When someone made a suggestion, others said, "That sounds good." When someone asked about the weekend, they said, "Same old, same old." When someone wasn't certain, they said, "I'm not sure." As weeks went by, I collected chunks like treasures. Every time I heard a new one, I wrote it down. I kept a small notebook in my pocket. I went home and practiced saying them out loud. Some chunks were easy, like "let me think," or "you know what I mean." Others took more practice, like "what have you been up to?" or "I don't feel like it." But slowly they started to feel natural. I stopped translating in my head. I stopped building perfect grammatical sentences. Instead, I just used the chunks, and people understood me perfectly. One afternoon, 2 months after I started working, something wonderful happened. I was taking a break outside. I saw a girl sitting on the steps. She looked upset. She had her phone in her hand. She seemed frustrated. I hesitated for a moment. Then I decided to be brave. I walked over. I said, "Hey, are you okay?" She looked up at me. She sighed. "Not really," she said. "My phone died. I'm supposed to meet my friend, but I don't know where she is." Without thinking, I said, "That sounds rough. Let me think. There's a phone store around the corner. Maybe they can help you charge it." She smiled. "That sounds good, thank you." We walked together to the phone store. While we waited, we started talking. Her name was Emily. She was a university student. She asked where I was from. I told her about Mexico and my journey. She asked, "What have you been up to since you got here?" I smiled. I recognized the chunk immediately. I said, same old, just working at a restaurant, trying to improve my English." She laughed. "Well, your English sounds pretty good to me." We talked for almost an hour. The conversation flowed naturally. I used chunks without thinking. When she suggested we exchange numbers, I said, "That sounds good." When we said goodbye, she said, "Long time no see, right?" We both laughed. We had just met. The phrase didn't fit. But it was funny. As I walked back, I felt something new. I felt confident. I felt like I could actually communicate. Emily and I became friends. We met for coffee once a week. She introduced me to her friends. My social circle grew. The more I talked, the more chunks I learned. Conversations were like puzzles. Chunks were the pieces that fit together. I learned chunks for agreeing, like absolutely or for sure. I learned chunks for disagreeing politely, like I see what you mean, but I learned chunks for starting conversations, like hey, what's new? Or how have you been? One day, Emily invited me to a party. I was nervous. There would be many people I didn't know. I would have to make small talk. Small talk was always difficult for me. But I decided to go. When I arrived, Emily introduced me to several people. Each time, I used chunks. When someone asked, "How's it going?" I said, "Pretty good, you?" When someone said, "I haven't seen you around," I explained I was new. When someone asked, "What have you been up to?" I gave a short, natural answer. At one point, I talked to a guy named Jason. He told me about his job. It sounded complicated and boring. When he finished, he said, "You know what I mean?" I nodded. I said, "Totally." I only understood half of what he said. But that simple chunk made him feel heard. He smiled and continued talking. I realized something important. Chunks weren't just about understanding language. They were about building connections. They showed you were listening. They showed you cared. They made you part of the conversation. As months passed, my English improved dramatically. But not because I studied more grammar. Not because I memorized vocabulary lists. It was because I focused on chunks. I noticed native speakers didn't think about grammar. They just spoke in natural patterns. They used ready-made phrases. By learning chunks, I learned to think in English, not translate from Spanish. This made everything faster and more natural. At the restaurant, Tony noticed my improvement. One day, he asked if I wanted to be a server. Not just kitchen help. This was a big deal. Servers made more money from tips. They had to interact with customers directly. I was nervous, but I said yes. My first day as a server was challenging. I had to take orders. I had to answer questions about the menu. I had to make small talk with customers, but I relied on chunks. When customers asked, "What do you recommend?" I said, "Let me think. The pasta here is amazing." When they said, "That sounds good," I smiled. I said, "Great choice." When they thanked me, I said, "No problem. Have a great day." I made mistakes, of course. Sometimes I used chunks in the wrong context. Once, a customer asked if we had a certain wine. I accidentally said, "Long time no see." The customer laughed. I quickly corrected myself. But these mistakes didn't discourage me. I learned from them. I kept practicing. The important thing was that I communicated naturally. One evening, a regular customer came in. Her name was Mrs. Patterson. She was an elderly woman. She always sat at the same table. She ordered the same meal. She had been coming for years. She loved to chat with the staff. That night, she seemed sad. When I asked, "How's it going?" she sighed. "Not so good, actually. My daughter was supposed to visit, but she canceled. I'm feeling lonely." I felt bad for her. Without overthinking, I said, "I'm sorry to hear that. That sounds rough. If you don't feel like eating alone, I can sit with you during my break." Her face lit up. "That sounds good, dear. Thank you." During my break, I sat with her. We talked about her life, her family, her memories. I used every chunk I knew. When she told stories, I said, "You know what I mean?" to show I understood. When she asked about my life, I said, same old, with a smile. When we finished talking, she squeezed my hand. She said, "You're a sweet young man. Thank you for spending time with me." That moment taught me something. Language isn't just about words. It's about connecting with people. It's about making them feel heard. By the end of my first year, I felt like a different person. I wasn't the scared guy who froze at "How's it going?" I was confident. I was social. I was comfortable in English. I had friends. I had a good job. I had a sense of belonging. And all of this came from learning chunks. I didn't need perfect grammar to communicate. I didn't need a huge vocabulary. I just needed to speak how people actually speak. Looking back now, I realize something. My English teacher in Mexico taught me important things. Grammar and vocabulary are useful. I'm glad I learned them, but they were only the foundation. To actually use English in real life, I needed chunks. I needed shortcuts. I needed patterns. I needed ready-made phrases that make conversation flow. If I could give advice to anyone learning English, I would say this: don't just study the language, live it. Listen to how people really talk. Notice the chunks they use. Practice them until they feel natural. Don't be afraid of mistakes. Use chunks in real conversations, even if you're not sure. The more you practice, the more natural they become. Today, I still work at the restaurant, but I'm also taking classes at a community college. I'm studying business. I hope to open my own restaurant someday. My English continues to improve. I keep learning new chunks every day, but I never forget those early days when I felt lost, when I couldn't communicate, and I never forget how simple phrases changed everything. Phrases like, "How's it going?" and "That sounds good," and "You know what I mean." These chunks didn't just help me speak English. They helped me build a life. They helped me make friends. They helped me feel at home. That is the true power of language. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it inspires you to focus on chunks, not just grammar rules. I hope it encourages you to speak naturally, even if it means making mistakes. And most importantly, I hope it reminds you of something. Language is about connection, not perfection. If you're learning English right now, remember this. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be brave enough to try. Learn the chunks. Use them. Practice them. And watch how they transform your communication. Good luck on your journey. Remember, we're all learning together.